Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Guest Safety Officer Lobby Group. And here with me today, we have got a real treat. Honestly, no, it's not Gary. Not Gary. Gary's here because Gary has to be here. Unfortunately, I think it's contractual, something like that. But we've also got Nick Shackleton-Jones, an author, and not just any author, people, not just any author, an author who's written a book or two, I believe, that concern effective learning, the effective context model, and why this is important to us in our industry and how it could potentially make a massive difference. So, first of all, we have to go through the introduction. Sorry about that, Nick, but again, contractually obliged to let Gary say something while he's here. Gary, who are you? What do you do?
Thanks, Ian. I more appreciate these intros. They're getting better each week. I'm sure just because my start is bigger than yours and I have my own dressing room now, you're getting upset about this. But anyway, I'm Gary Twining-Wright. I've been in the industry for 37 years. That's the whole security industry. Trainer, security operative, done most things in security, apart from cyber. As I keep saying, it's not my bag. I don't do cyber security. That's me in a nutshell today, Ian.
Right, well, and I'm Ian Fox. I'm a generalist. That's basically what I do. I like to read lots and lots of things and get a wider perspective on what's going on in life rather than getting stuck in a silo, which unfortunately most people tend to do in this sector. So we're now going to hand over and ask about our author. Yeah, okay. Nick Shackleton-Jones. Please tell us about yourself, Nick. How did you, first of all, get into it? As a boy, you woke up, you thought, I want to be a psychologist and work in learning and development. Is that true?
I love that you're making me feel, sound important. I think my wife would probably, have pick a fight with you around that. But for me, it's absolutely great. So yeah, how did I get into it?
Yeah,
I think I don't want to. Well, it's a long story, I guess. So I want to try and
you got
tell it as a short
seconds.
story. I got 30 seconds. Well, I did philosophy and psychology at university. I was sort of really interested in people and what makes them tick. And then after that, what do you do with a philosophy and psychology degree? Well, I kind of stumbled into a job teaching psychology. I was a psychology lecturer, but there was something weird about it. And there's something really deeply weird about education, which is I would find myself standing there in a classroom, writing on a board. This was in the days when we still had OHPs, overhead projectors, and transparencies, and you write on a transparency sometimes. And I would write, Piaget said all learning should be exploratory. And I would look over my shoulder, and a whole room full of students were dutifully scribbling down Piaget, all learning should be exploratory. And you think, oh, there's just something terribly wrong with that. It was a grossly ineffective learning model. And so I left kind of education, went into corporate learning, and to my horror, corporate learning kind of apes that content dumping model.
Sorry, Nick, I'm going to have to take, because we three, obviously, I have to include Gary in this, by the way. We three understand exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. But when you say content dumping there, what do you mean?
Thanks for stopping me. I don't want to go off on a rant. I think
No.
and just keep pushing me and prodding me, and because this is about what your audience want to hear, not what about I want to say, and that's really important. And you understand your audience probably far better than I do, so keep correcting me. I'll tell you what it is. Content dumping is what happens generally in education. That is the easiest way. It is a generalization, yeah, sure, but it's a way to characterize what education does. It takes a bunch of stuff. And if you remember your school days, you were all of that stuff, you were sort of ushered into a room and somebody, an authority would write the stuff up on a board or show you some slides. And the idea was that you would memorize that stuff and that somehow this would change your behavior. But even just on that model, if you think back to your school days, that content dumping approach, how much do you remember of algebra? How effective was it? It was grossly ineffective. It is demonstrably. There's a guy called Eric Mazur. If you think I'm just going off on a rant, there's
No.
lots of research to back this up. Eric Mazur found that he said that lectures are so inefficient as a model that if you've seen his research, it would be unethical to continue using this approach. But basically, that is content dumping. It's taking some content and you just push it out at people, and you expect them to memorize it, and moreover, you expect their behavior to change. And the horror of it is, despite knowing that it doesn't work at all, you forget almost everything, and it doesn't change your behavior. That is what we do. And we spend billions, literally billions, something like 460 billion a year in content dumping, knowing that it doesn't work around the world. We call it training. And yeah, it's crazy.
I like that. We call it training. So, Gary, you got anything quickly to pick up?
I've just got to fully agree. I mean, it's been, you were talking about overhead projectors. Mine was chalkboard days. Just going back to Roman times, just for you, Ian. But yeah, I mean, just even now in our industry, we do the same thing. As I say, I'm a trainer, and a majority of the time is, if you're training the DS course or door supervisor course, security guard course, it is PowerPoint, death by PowerPoint, and we're expecting people to take all this knowledge in over a 5-day period, and then do a multiple choice question. And it doesn't work. It really doesn't work at all.
Yeah, look, I mean, in case people wonder who is this bloke, going off, running his mouth on the industry.
No, I'm not having that. Not having that. You are going to get stopped here. You wouldn't be here at all if you weren't an expert in your field. You are. It's really important, honestly. One of the biggest things that we need in this industry and for this industry across its whole breadth is to have different voices giving different opinions, saying that there is an alternative way to do things. Yes, the next step will be, how do we do that? But that is a different question. But right now, we need people like you to turn around and say exactly what you said. This model isn't effective, and why? And there you go.
Yeah. So, and thank you for interjecting. I'm going to say I'm not just a theoretician. I've spent most of my work, most of my life, probably about 35 years in the industry. I worked for the BBC and put in place pretty much all of the BBC's regulatory training. When I joined the BBC, production safety was the only program that people had to do. We put in place legal online, all the data protection stuff, all the DI stuff, as well as several iterations of production safety and other safety programs. Then moved to BP. I joined BP post Macondo. I interviewed every single member of the executive team about the oil spill disaster, Horizon disaster. And a big part of my work at BP was working on safety culture, working with the Safety Academy, as well as other more familiar areas like kind of data protection and security and so on. And then moved into professional services, where in my last organization, Deloitte, I was chief learning officer. Basically, the first thing I had to do was 3 days worth of regulatory training. And then it was part of my responsibility to look at how we could do that better. So I'm not just somebody who has a kind of a point of view. I've also worked on this area. I was an e-learning developer for 15 years. I ran e-learning development teams. So I know I spending that time in Flash and HTML coding compliance e-learning courses. So I can do the high level, I can do the low level as well, I hope.
Yeah, it's. I mean, that's the thing that's the thing that matters. We've got to have more people like you that are actually putting in a view, because otherwise, it's not going to change for the better. And the bit sort of now returning swiftly to content dumping is this is my biggest fear about what's happening within the context of security, because at the end of all of this training, this full 6-day training course where you'll see somewhere in the region of 1,000 slides and do at least 1,000 assessment criteria to choose from, that you are then legally responsible for protecting a member of the public.
Yeah, now let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, because there's a deeply cynical position that you and plenty of the listeners will be familiar with, which is this has got nothing to do with, learning and behavioral change. And all it is it's a risk radiation agenda. And so there is a position you can take, and let's address that kind of face on, which is in the majority of organizations, most of the usage of learning and development is compliance driven, typically around 80%. And so you could take the view, justifiably, the L&D teams and all of that learning industry is predominantly just about compliance and regulation, and that has very little to do with learning and behavior change, and more to do with radiating risk from the center out to the individual, which is why people will often say, oh, I haven't got time for that, which is why they're so kind of reluctant, which is why they see L&D negatively. And in support of that, a colleague of mine, Charles Jennings, once said, look, the role of the L&D team is just to keep the executive out of jail. So let me sort of tackle that, because I think it's important to address that kind of cynicism. My experience has been that when people talk about the regulators are rarely happy with just a tick box exercise. That's not what the regulator wants. The regulators typically want much more than that. Whatever area of regulation it is, they actually want to see people behaving differently and doing things differently, and organizations, caring more about some of these things. And if you talk about the executive, as I say, spoke to everyone within BP on the executive, they actually deeply cared about safety and behavior change. It wasn't for them just kind of risk radiation exercise. So where does the problem come from? I think it comes from this content dumping, which is, if we really wanted to change behaviors in the area of safety and security, this is not the way to go about it. The way to go about it is not to push a bunch of information into an e-learning course and force everybody to do it and complete a test at the end. That's where the cynicism comes from. It's not that regulators are cynical. It's not that executive teams are cynical. It's not even that L&D are cynical. It's just that we're using the wrong approach to achieve that kind of an outcome. And people know that. People think, well, it's just a waste of my time. It's just another tick box exercise. Click next, next, next. We've got to stop doing that.
How do we go about it? That's I suppose.
Yeah. Three things. Three things you can do, and I'll illustrate them. So the first thing is build performance support, build useful stuff, build resources. Give you an example. When I joined Deloitte, I had to do, as I say, 3 days worth of regulatory training, right? One of the modules was on accepting gifts, on ethics and accepting gifts. And it turns out it's fantastically complex whether or not you're allowed to accept a gift. It is, if it's part of an ongoing procurement process, you can't do it. If it's a protected entity, you can't do it. A whole series of rules and regulations above a certain amount, right? What's the value of, because we know I'm not going to remember any of that. The things that drive my learning are challenges. So what's going to happen when somebody 6 months later offers me a gift? Am I going to go back and hunt down that e-learning 40-minute e-learning module? And no, just build stuff, useful stuff, whatever area of operation, with security or safety, things that people can refer to at the point of need, because you may need to put people through the module at some point, but that's not what they're going to refer to when they hit a problem. So the first thing is build stuff that they can actually refer to, guidance, resources that are easy to access. That's the first thing. Second thing is, and this was true, I think, in every organization, it was just indiscriminate. The regulatory training it didn't really relate closely to my role. It was just a whole bunch of stuff. And people suffer from this. They sort of think, oh, it's just, a lot of this isn't relevant to me. So actually personalization, understanding the tasks that people do. In the BBC, for example, if you're a content producer, you might work in a war zone. You might work at heights. You might work with children. But you don't want to have to do all of that if you're not working in a war zone or not working with children. So we built a little system where people would check the box. They say, well, I'm going to be doing this task and this task and that task. So all of the training was going to be relevant to them. And that changes things. But the last and the most important thing is this thing is don't dump when you need to adopt a different approach. In every case, you are either pushing or pulling. In an organization, there's stuff that people really care about. If your washing machine breaks down, for example, you'll go and Google it, right? And you will pull information because you really care about that. But the world that you and I work in is mostly push. It's things like DEI, safety, security, data protection, things that people don't care about. And in that instance, you've really got to adopt a methodology which will make them care. And that is the 3 S's: storytelling, simulation, or scenario. That's the way that you're really going to make somebody care about. So we do exactly the wrong thing, which is we just push out a load of information. But if people aren't made to really care about it, if they don't really understand why this stuff matters, then it will just be shed like water off a duck's back. And so those 3 things, actually, performance support, personalization, and actually pushing in the right way, that's what you need to do to make a difference, in answer to your question.
Well, that's great. You're going to have to bring Gary in a minute, because we were talking. We both trained. Obviously, I haven't been there, and we've sat there in training. We were saying the other day, we've sat there and we've been hanging. You know what I mean? You just, God, how long is this training going to last before I can get away? Gary,
Yeah, I mean, I feel I was telling you, Ian, I remember sitting there in a lecture about a leadership course. There was a major. He was there on a PowerPoint, death by PowerPoint, and we're all sitting in the lecture room, and we're all doing literally that. And suddenly the slide changed, and the slide brought up. It's a full-on section attack. So they're suddenly all like that. Oh, great, section attack. And he's gone, Delta have now moved off to the right-hand side to our flank, and we've got the water teams. We're all awake. And he finished, went, right, now I've got your attention, we'll go back to the slides. And the only thing I remember, and the only thing I actually remember about the whole lecture was the section attack. I can't remember anything about the whole leadership course, but that whole breakup woke us all up for that few seconds. We're literally all poised, thinking we're going to learn something really interesting from the major about section attack and what have you.
Yeah.
But it was just general talk. But he broke it up to make us all alive again.
Well, let me tell you about breaking the most extreme examples of breaking things up, right? So at the BBC, they used to train journalists for, going to a war zone or whatever. And what part of this training course is you'd all get in a Jeep or a Land Rover or whatever, and you'd be driving through a forest, and you'd find yourself some bumpy, remote, track, thinking, wow, blimey, this training venue is a bit off the beaten path. And a bunch of blokes, as it happened to ex-SAS blokes, would leap out of the undergrowth, wielding weapons with balaclavas, haul you out of this Land Rover, put a hood over your head, and then proceed to interrogate you for hours at an end. And that was the program that the BBC, put people through to prepare them. And that's a good way to prepare, because the best way to prepare for something is to simulate, to do the thing that you're going to have to experience. Now, I was approached and he said, well, could you convert that into an e-learning course? I said, no. Can you imagine? Bunch of bullet points on, how would that have had, how would that have had the same impact? Another example from BP, this was not a program I designed, but it was the red bag. You might have heard me share this example, the red bag example. So people often don't care enough about safety at work, and you can talk till you're blue in the face about procedures and whatever, and if people don't care, they basically ignore them. This is my point. And so what they did was they had people wear a red bag on their arm for a day. So, and at the end of the day, how did that make you feel? How debilitating was that in terms of your job? How self-conscious did you feel throughout the day? What impact was that going to have on your life? And the point being that it was an experience that made people really understand what losing an arm, for example, because you didn't follow procedure, would really feel like, and it brought the impact home. So, yeah, I mean, if you're going to get people together, do something that wakes people up. To your point, Gary, don't just sit showing them the slides they can watch in their own time. If they care enough about them, they will. But if you haven't really brought it home how important this is, then you're wasting your time.
I think what of the problem in our industry is, say, you've got 5 days that content dumping.
Yeah,
you put the delegates or candidates, they go for it, they take the test, everything they've learned over that 5 days, by the time they come operational, it's gone. They can't remember how to write statements. They can't do. Some of them can't even use radios. They've just literally forgotten how to use a radio, how to turn the thing on, use the alphabet. All this, it literally goes out the window. Like, you get the person, they rock up. They've never done security before.
Yeah,
and they've done a 5-day course, and you go, okay, there's a radio, and they look at you blank. How to use a radio. You've done it on your course, and they still. So you've now on the job, we've now got to teach them how to use a radio, even though they've done this in the classroom. The next one is something goes wrong, the situation goes wrong. You know how to write a statement? No. But you've done it on your course. You've had to do it on your course. I know you've done it on the course because I teach the course. So, you know, why can't you remember it? Well, we've just done it. And
it's really simple to solve that problem. There's two ways to solve that problem. The one is that the first obvious one is you make the course a simulation of the work, because the reality is that people's challenges drive their learning. And what you're saying there, Gary, is exactly right, which is that if you just sat there watching the slides go by, you don't remember any of that, because the point at which you actually learn it is when you have to do it for real. So the obvious answer is, well, make people do it for real on the course. You know, build a course which is all experiential, which is now you're going to have to do this, now you do this, now you're being challenged to do that. But the other answer is, well, if you accept that most people's learning is going to happen on the job, as it does with doctors, for example, you know, doctors say the same thing. You know, actually most of what they learned, most of the learning happens after they've graduated as a doctor, when they actually have to do it. Create performance support, create the stuff that, you know, when they have to produce a report, there's a template for the report, there's 10 top tips for producing a report, there's guidance that they can easily refer back to when they hit the problem. Otherwise, they're just going to ask the person sitting next to them, you know.
But that is part of the problem, because this flash, you know, it's almost flashcard approach. And what's more is they teach the instructors that are in the training, that are providing the training, invariably teach to the exam. They don't all they want to do is, because the person who's turned up, you know, is paying you so that they can get a license and go to work. They are, to fail means that they're going to go out and say, well, he was rubbish, he was a rubbish trainer, I failed, don't go and use him. So there's this pressure on the training provider to ensure that they pass. There is a pressure from the training provider, the awarding organizations for whom the training providers operate. There is a pressure on them as well to ensure that the exams that they put forward and the training materials achieve compliance, but aren't unachievable, if that makes that, and that's putting it nicely.
Imagine getting on an airplane and your pilot saying, "Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Just to let you know, this is the first time I've actually flown a real plane. But rest assured, I've passed all of the multiple choice tests." It's like, hang on, I think I need to get off this plane. I think the answer is, and I know it's because I'm so critical of this and how people learn, because it's the same in education. That's basically, it's like a cash for certificates scheme.
Yes.
The whole thing is, I have to, as a lecturer, I have to get all that stuff into your head so that you can pass the exam, and then you can immediately forget all that stuff, but you've got the certificate, and the certificate means that you get the job. But you know, basically all the learning then happens on the job, right? And that's how the whole economy works, of the educational economy works. But it's a travesty, you know. So why wouldn't we actually equip people with the skills to do the things that we want them to be able to do? Well, that would be a little bit more complex. We'd have to do what aviation does. We'd have to have simulators. We'd actually have to give people an opportunity to practice things and have a go at things and be much more experiential, you know, in the way that we deliver training. And to be fair, some organizations, some trainers do that. You know, they do focus on the experiential stuff, and that's what gets remembered. As you will know, I've been a trainer, still am. I still stand out with people. The only things people are going to remember are the things where you got them to do stuff, where you got them to actually, you know, have a go at something and practice something, or do something which is challenging. So yeah, it's not the easiest thing to do, but it's the thing that makes the impact.
So sorry, Ian, I was just going to say, what we have in our industry, we've got a lot of trainers out there who don't have a proper or decent operational experience. So literally, they just sit there, they content dump.
That's a problem, right?
And they don't know how to teach either. It's very, you know, it's getting harder to get in the teaching award now. But one thing I've always found when I've seen these other instructors, they've got very limited experience. When I've always taught the security course, I bring in live information, which happened for me in the job. I've got body-worn camera footage, and I try to infiltrate that into the training so people start seeing the real live stuff, not bits and pieces which happened, or they've dragged something off YouTube and bits and pieces. So I try and give them that actual experience. But as I say, going back to it, is just that you've got these guys who can't teach, and what's happening is that they don't care about the candidate. So when you get out there, they've passed their course, and obviously they have forgotten everything. So they get there, and it's like you've got a blank canvas again. They've rocked up for the job. They've done their so-called scenario-based stuff, which is pretty weak radio training, pretty weak statement writing, and again, and then their answer is, if you want them to start doing more training or CPD, continued professional development, their answer is, well, I've already done the course. Why do I need to do any more now?
And they're expected to pay for it all, Nick. This is one of the things, you know, for an average go out as a, and you've got to imagine that these aren't university students. These are people that are basically level 2. Yeah, and when I say level 2, most of them we are stretching to get to level 2.
Yeah,
at a huge push, with a lot of help, and would almost certainly fail if we weren't teaching to the exam. So, you know, when they paid for all of that money, invested all that thing, they think that they think that something's going to change in them at the end of that by a teacher. Do you know, there are some people out there, aren't they, who've only done 1 hour on a door. Yeah, and then I trained it for like 5 or 6 years. I did obviously a bit more experience than that, but I know there are people out there who've had no experience of working in the industry, who've got it, who are training. So how are these people supposed to do that? And the training, the training of the teachers, that's also a tick box event.
Yeah.
You know? I don't know. Is you know, when you were putting things into place for your L&D teams, did you have to put a structure in place for the training delivery as well?
Yeah, so it's such an important thing that we're talking about here. I think I began to get increasingly frustrated with this kind of educational approach to kind of training people. Just get some information together, we agree the topics, we put it in a course, deliver that stuff. Doesn't make any blind bit of difference. We just carry on. And I think so we had to have a systematic way of turning that around. And so what we do at the beginning of those conversations, in answer to your question, Ian, is we sit down with, in our case, the organization, and say, what are people supposed to be able to do differently if this training is successful? And so in your world, that might translate into, tell me what are the top 20 or top 10 tasks that a safety officer needs to be able to do to be competent. Right, okay. Let's design a program where they actually get to practice doing those things, where it's based around those experiences. And then we will award a certificate on the basis of demonstrable competence that we've actually said for this role, it's really important that you can do these 10 things. And we have seen them do those 10 things. And they're confident now they can actually do those 10 things. And although that sort of sounds like common sense, it's not what education does. Education starts with topics. So as soon as we have a conversation which starts with topics, I say, let me just stop you there. Before we start pushing topics and content into a course or a module or whatever, let's just be really clear on what people should be able to do differently as a result of this program, and then design backwards from that objective. So they should be able to do these things. And so I don't want to particularly sort of go on about the 5DI model, but that's all free if people are interested in it. That's what human-centered design, that's what the 5DI design model does. It says, let's define in the first stage really clearly what it is people should be able to do. And in the second stage, let's talk to them. Say, right, as a safety officer, what challenges do you face day to day? What do you worry about day to day? And actually involve the audience in the design process so that it's actually addressing their needs. So that was the answer that I introduced the industry to solving that problem, which is, let's just stop pushing topics and content into courses. We know it doesn't work. Let's actually be clear on the outcomes, and let's involve the audience in the design process. And then let's build either experiences. So if we're going to get people together in a room, there should be no content. I literally mean that. There should be no content. There should be people doing stuff together, practicing things, or resources that are going to help them with the challenges that they've got, stuff that they can refer to when they hit a problem. So yeah, that was my answer to your question here.
And so you actually construct, yeah, because obviously this is different. So whoever it would have been, all the trainers that were there with BP and Deloitte and the BBC are going, yeah, let's do this, and then you come along and say, no,
Yeah,
yeah, no, we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
And then, so did you not have to train them first in order to, to re-educate, in the 5DI model?
Yeah. And that's been a big part of my life, is actually retraining, I guess, learning professionals to think differently about what they do. Because by and large, all they're doing is they're copying school. As a training professional, you think, oh, I know how to do this job because I've had to sit in classrooms and lectures. I've seen it. People put words up on a screen or whatever, and everybody, there's a quiz at the end, and that's how it works. And it's really, is often for many people, it's as simple as that. So actually stopping people doing education and saying, no, we're gonna do something different here, has been a big part of my career. But it's really taking off. There are many, I've worked with everybody from the big banks to big pharma to United Nations. I work with the Premier League, because there are people who are frustrated with the world, the old world of content dumping, and they've either got to the end of the tether, or they want to make a difference, and so they're looking at a way to do that, and that's what I help them to do.
I mean, in our industry, people could turn around and say, well, they are giving scenario-based stuff, and we have to video it. And again, a lot of it is work towards the exam. They video it. They got one, say, we do PI training, which is physical intervention training, and the trainers might pick three parts of that, and the student has to go and learn those three moves. There's loads of moves, but they would only video that section, and the AOs, or the organisations, will look at that. Oh, they've passed that one, and then they've got another situation. Let's go back to radios. They videoed how to use a radio, and literally, I've been there where people have got screens up on the board, and the person's reading off the screen, yes, Bravo, Charlie 1, and they read it, and so the awarding organisation goes, oh look, they are doing scenario-based stuff, and then they've got bits and pieces. Oh, you're in a nightclub and you've got to eject this person, and you're going to use this move, and it's videoed, and that's probably about the most scenario-based stuff people are working on, and it's videoed, and the AOs, sorry, again, oh, they've got it done, and it's done. But none of these people have actually learned the full spectrum of security safety. It's still, they come out, blank faces, no idea, a situation goes off, and I've seen guys do it. Even what happened to me a few weeks ago, where I was assaulted. We had a couple of new guys, they stood there watching. And that's the look. Even down to having a notebook and pen, the most basics. You got guys rocking up, no notebook and pen. It's a basic to all a security safety officer.
Yeah, you don't. The expression I sometimes use is, you don't learn, how to fight a war by playing chess. When I was trained at BP, to give an example from my world, at one point I was going to go offshore, and you have to fly out in a helicopter to a rig, right? And the way I was trained for that is they put you in a helicopter fuselage, a real thing, dress you up in all the gear, they flip it upside down, and they dunk you repeatedly into a swimming pool. And I can tell you, I'm not claustrophobic or afraid of water, but I could feel the sheer panic rising as I struggled to, in all this gear, unclip my belt. I was upside down, water flooding in. And actually, if you think you can prepare somebody for that by showing them some PowerPoint slides, the situations that you're describing, Gary, are emotional situations. And it's the same in leadership training. You can sit a leader in a class and talk to them about how to handle a difficult conversation. But when you've got somebody that close to your face, screaming in your face, all of that goes out of your head. So unless you've actually practiced that real situation or simulation of that, you are not going to be competent to handle it. This is why, especially for those sorts of examples, you have to recreate that experience. Yeah.
I think the thing that I want to just, the thing there is picking up on what Gary says, is these instances that Gary's describing are all staged for the video. As he said, somebody reading, and I said it, and it is all about being able to say, we complied. I spoke to an awarding organisation the other day and spoke about the problems with content dumping, etc., and all of this. And they said, well, it's in the regulations, that's okay. It's so we're complying with what we're doing, so it's you know, that's not our problem. They want to change it, then that's up to the regulator to change it. But it's the people that are being trained, it's the customers, it's the people that we look after that are going to suffer. So we all know, everybody in the chain knows that something's wrong. How do you alter those conversations, Nick?
Yeah, I guess so. So I'm not, having worked in kind of regulation training for many years, I've resisted becoming deeply cynical, because actually, as I said at the beginning, regulators, they're not just interested in people ticking the box. They do care about seeing organizations really trying to make a difference. And quite often senior executives, they're not just, again, concerned about the legal position of the organization. They want to reduce accidents or injury or loss of staff. And so there are people who care. It's just they don't know what good looks like, is the answer to your question, Ian. Unless you can show them something that's better and say, hey, why don't we do this instead? Wouldn't that be a better, and you can take that to a regulator, or you can take that to the team. And that's a lot of what I do, which is, I call it destination postcards, just showing people alternatives and saying, well, how about we do this instead? And if you can get buy-in to doing something different, it often sort of snowballs. So showing people that there's an alternative, I think, is a part of the answer. There are people who are just cynical and, well, you know, we just need to meet the regulations, but there are a lot of people who want to make a difference, like yourselves, you know, and see an opportunity to do it.
Well, that's why you're here. We want to talk to you. So again, that comes from one of the interviews that you were speaking. Was it Kirsty Green?
Yeah.
And you know, you were speaking afterwards, or sort of afterwards towards the end, and saying it's about seeing other things, widening your horizons, using other experiences from your life, not just focusing in your silo, you know, staying in your little bubble of learning and development. But I think you spoke about Nietzsche and Plato and a couple of other things. And me and Gary found out as a result, we both read the what was it, the Tao of Pooh and the Tea of Piglet. Oh yeah, see, so we both actually read that. So we've got all of these different things, but we just don't know how to combine them. Does that make sense?
It does. And often there's a problem with, you know, L&D people, training people, sort of the stay in your lane mentality, and they kind of just read more training books. But if you just step to the side and you look at people like anthropologists like Jared Diamond, you know, he's written a book called, I think, Guns, Germs and Steel and The World Until Yesterday. He talks about, in other cultures, nobody ever needed nobody needed classrooms to learn. You know, people were learning by practicing things, by being coached and mentored, by being supported, by having a go at things and getting feedback, by working with their peers in groups. And, you know, it gives you a different perspective on learning. So, yeah, absolutely. You know, look at how learning happens in your own life, for example. This is something I often challenge people. Most people, if you ask them, what were the things you remember from school? They'll remember, you know, really big challenges, you know, practical things that they had to do, you know, triumphs, embarrassments. They'll remember friends. They'll remember school dinners. They'll remember inspirational teachers. Well, how are you going to use that knowledge to build a more effective training program? Stories play a big role. I'll give you one example. When I joined a big professional services firm, there was lots of really, really dull, I won't say which, but really, really dull sort of e-learning stuff. But then somebody told me a story about a director who stole a bike light. It's a true story. They had a bike shed, and, you know, it was in central London, so a lot of people used to kind of, you know, cycle to work. And one of the very senior people, director level, really high earning individual, well respected for this company, nicked a bike light, one of those little rubber bike lights off a bike. And they didn't realize that there was a security camera pointed at the shed. And so obviously they had to have some sort of adjudication on this. And the question was, you know, what do we do? Is it a slap on the wrist? But they fired him. They fired him. It didn't matter. It's like a Jeremy Clarkson type thing for the BBC. It didn't matter that he was earning all that money. It was a zero tolerance approach to that kind of behavior. And that single story, somebody tells you that when you join, you think, oh, okay, that's this kind of an organization. So what you were saying earlier, Gary, about, body cams, being able to tell those stories and actually, really bring it home to people, the situations that you've been in, enable people to kind of see it for themselves. That can be hugely powerful because it doesn't become real until people feel it, really.
See, about the learning, I mean, I look at myself when you talk about it. I mean, I've been a martial artist all my life as well. So I've always taught people in a way. And, learning through martial arts, there's not really much PowerPoint or anything like that to learn.
Yeah.
And you're out there learning it. And people learn from being visual. And it takes me to another point. I do a lot of medical work as well. And I train at a place called Icarus up in Hereford, which is a great bunch of guys. And they've got a facility up there, it's a big warehouse. In that warehouse is a street. In that street, you've got shops, you've got a bombed out building, you've got a yard. They've also got an Arctic room, they've got a jungle room, they've got a forest room, and they've got a pub. What else they've got in this place? They've got a house, a shop. So when we go and do a medical training up there, you've got all these facilities in this training. So you've got your PowerPoints, and you're in the classroom. I think they do it for about 20, 30 minutes. We're in there, and we're being, deaf by PowerPoint. And then we're expected to go downstairs, and they give you scenarios, and you've got to switch on because the scenarios are real. They can turn this building into, they can flood it, they can make it dark, they can have it bright lights, they can have it raining in there. I mean, I've been there. We've had a big car crash in a bombed out building. It's raining, and they've got, there we are, deal with it. And boom, you've got to deal with it. And it puts you under a lot of pressure. I mean, I think even one of them, because we've been in the NHS, we've been dealing with people with mental health problems. They put us in a room where a person was tied up to a radiator and being subjected to torture. They brought in the medical team. It was packed with smoke. We've got gunfire going off. I've got a DS shouting at me, screaming at me. But you dealt with it and you remember it. So when we deal with stuff now, and my team out on the ground, it's like, we deal with things. We've been drilled in that frame of mind. But it's also taken on some military training, how to strip a rifle and put a rifle together again. Again, that's been drilled into me, and I could still do that now on that learning side. But it was also fun to learn.
That's really interesting.
They didn't have rifles, Gary, in the Roman times. Stop it. Now you're going too far. Bow and arrow.
That's the way to do it. But people will listen to that and say, well, it's too expensive. We can't do that. We can't afford that. But one thing I do, we make a lot of use of actors, who frankly aren't that expensive, because you can recreate situations in a classroom that feel quite real for people. As I say, if you've got somebody right in your face screaming at you, your heart rate will go up, your whatever you were thinking will go out of your head. And we do that for managers, for example, to deal with really difficult conversations. Somebody sitting in front of you breaking down in tears, or complaining about something or angry. And it's wonderful if you can have an entire building with all of those situations recreated, but you can actually do a lot to recreate situations just in a classroom. Even the very simple thing of getting people to stand up and give a presentation. We used to do that with new analysts, which is each of you have to, I've got the cards here somewhere, you pick a card, now stand up in front of everybody and talk about that topic for a minute. And the heart rate goes and, everything goes to pieces in their heads. You can put people in little situations quite easily. But if you can do it the way that you described, that's perfect.
Again, I mean, if I go back to our learning side, they will say, well, we use the candidates to do that. But again, you've got inexperienced people trying to teach inexperienced people. And again, going back to these people, a lot of these people, when they come to us, they are level 2 and they've had very poor times in the classroom or school. So, they're not confident to stand up. It's only got a confidence, they put pressure on them. They can't even say their own name at some point. Again, blank faces. And they're now under pressure in front of, say, 24 people, 12 to 24 people. And that whole mindset of, it doesn't work. And what I've always found is this word fail, pass and fail. I remember going to another military course, and the directing staff went, this is a pass or fail course. And just to let you know that we've had something like 87% failures. Well, I put my hand up and went, yeah, sorry, sir. We've all failed the course. He went, what do you mean? I said, well, you just told us we've all failed the course. Well, how'd you work that out? Because you've just told us. You just told us you've got an 87% failure rate. So everyone in this room now thinking, oh my God, we're all going to fail. Not thinking, great. I mean, shouldn't you be saying, my job is here to get you through the course and we're going to do this. But again, it was another content in dump course. And we all sat there like that,
Yeah.
you know, and I did pass that course, just to let you know. So,
yeah,
you know, I don't know about everyone else, but I did.
The other nine people failed.
Yeah.
I think.
Sorry, Nick.
I think that a lot of people. I really sympathise with what you've, described. I think a lot of the people who are advocates for that content dumping educational approach are people who did well out of education, and they think because they did well through it, it's good for everybody else. But actually, a lot of people are relatively traumatized by their educational experiences, because every educational experience is a potential opportunity for them to fail and for them to be embarrassed and them to feel stupid, and actually that's a problem as well. That's why people are reluctant to step into training or learning situations, because it's perceived as a kind of a threat, or because, as you say, they didn't do well at school and they think, oh, here we go again. And so I think we have to be able to turn that around, actually, and change that perception.
I think one of the things that I picked up there is, if we're going to train people, and we've got, and just briefly, because I'm aware of the time, and hey, you've written a book, it would be nice to hear about that, because otherwise people won't believe me. They'll think I just said he had an author on, never even mentioned it.
Yeah. Where is it? This is it. How people learn. I've mentioned it now, but
you've got
that's
the second. Is that the second edition?
Yeah, it's the better edition. Because for the first time you write a book, people don't tell you this, but it's not all it's cracked up to be. Basically, the publishers will tell you, pretty much what they think their audience want to hear, and so you don't get quite to write the book you want to write. But because the first one was a big success, we've got a bit more latitude on the second one. So yeah.
So how many copies did you sell in the end of the
I don't know.
I bought one.
Absolutely no idea. Frankly, I don't. You don't make a lot of money out of it. Right. You make about £1 a book, and you might sell a few thousand. So it's not like you're going to be buying a sports car from your earnings. And actually, frankly, I've started to try and give it away as much as possible. So I read the first couple of chapters on Vimeo. I got the publishers to agree. So I'm not remotely interested in sales of the book. I'm interested in the ideas and the potential for people to change things, because they're thinking differently. So if I could, I'd effectively give it away. It's not the way the publishing industry works.
No, I won't be happy because I bought mine. You can send me a free. He'll have one for free because he's that kind of person. But doesn't appreciate the effort and time that you've put in to write it. I did, but if you're going to give it away, I want my cash. But honestly, but taking that seriously, we've got the context, so the effective context model.
Yeah.
So Gary and I are trainers, and a lot of the people that we deal with at this moment, at this particular, they also do a lot of training. So can you just tell people, given the short time that we've got left, about the effective context model and the 5DI toolkit?
Yeah, it's probably good to put me under some time pressure. So one of the things I realized as a psychology lecturer is we don't have a theory of learning. It's just true. We just have this, it's proto-science. We have this patchwork of different theories. You've got learning styles, which is largely discredited. We've got behaviorism, which doesn't explain observational learning. We've got, bits and bobs of different folklore and whatever. And so I realized that if we were going to answer these questions about how do you design learning, how do you measure learning, when is learning effective, you'd have to have a kind of a theory of learning. So what do we know about human learning? Well, we know that human memory is tremendously unreliable, right? So different people will remember different things. Memory appears to be largely confabulation. Nobody's memory, even with photographic memory, it's not 100% accurate. So what's really going on? So the answer I came up with, proposed the effective context model, is you don't actually remember anything that happens to you in your life, which sounds hugely counterintuitive. What you store are your reactions, effectively your emotional reactions to things. So if there's a fight on a train, you'll remember that. Your emotional reactions, those will be quite deep. And when you get to work, the first thing you'll do is you tell a story. You say, you won't believe what happened on the train. This fight broke out, people throwing punches left, right, and center. Now, your memory will be inaccurate, but you'll be reconstructing from your emotional reactions to things. And so all of learning is governed by, if you want somebody to change their behavior, you've got to put them through an experience where they have an emotional reaction to something, they store that reaction changes their behavior going forwards. This also explains, for example, why if you're really interested in architecture and your friend is interested in plants and you sit side by side on the same train journey, you will remember different things because you care about architecture. So you have a reaction to all the things you've seen, whereas they don't. They didn't notice any of it. So the effective context model says, look, the only stuff that you store is your emotional reactions to things, and you use those emotional reactions to reconstruct what you've experienced, and that changes your behavior. How does that help us, though, in practice, in training and development? Well, you're always in one of two situations. You're either trying to get people to care about something they don't, like data protection or security or safety, by putting through an experience which gets a reaction, or you know they already care about something, like, I don't know, what to do in this situation, or what to do when your washing machine breaks down. And then you're just trying to provide the information, the resources that they need. You're always doing one of those two things. So how do you then design in that way? So the 5DI model, which I introduced, is human-centered design. And it basically starts like this. It says, right, if we're designing a program, how would we see people thinking and feeling and doing things differently if this program were a success? So you write all those down. And then you go to the people who are going to be on the program, in your case, young kind of potential safety officers, and you say, right, what do you care about day to day? What are you really worried about? Most of them are worried about how they look in front of their peers, not looking stupid. That's a big one. And what tasks are you having to do day to day? So if you look at your job, what are the top 10 things that you're having to do on a regular basis? And then you design a program using experiences and resources that address the things that they really care about. So if you don't want to look stupid in front of your friends, here are the top 10 things not to do, because you will end up looking stupid. Or here are the top 10 mistakes that new safety officers tend to make, and people will download that and they'll think, oh, well, okay, I'm going to look at that because I want to avoid doing that. Or you put them through experiences which really bring it home to people how much it matters to do the right thing in this situation. And so the 5DI is a systematic model for actually designing in a way which has the impact that you're aiming to have. So does that answer your question, Ian?
Yeah,
how did I do time-wise?
I don't know. Do you think it could be applied to, given the time pressure, the amount that we're expected to sort of take on board within the time frame that we've got, or that's allowable? Do you think it's possible to design something that would, alleviate or improve public safety, reduce harm, and harm because that's what concerns me, because it's not only the public that are at risk, it is the individual. Because if they do something wrong, they are the ones that are going to face legal action, potentially civil action, potentially, or at the very least, be blamed for something that they probably didn't really know how to do. I was explaining to a solicitor the other day, it's like you teach a solicitor to go to qualify, but then he gets to court and he's never heard of mens rea or habeas corpus, and that's it. And he's missing half of the key points that will enable him to perform properly.
If all we're going to do is just, flash all the information past people and get them to sign on the dotted line so that they take the risk, then we could waste less of people's time. You could just send people a document and say, you have to sign this to say you've read and understood all of this, and now the risk sits with you if you do anything wrong. So if that's all we were doing, there'd be a much more efficient way of doing that. I think all of us on this call and people listening aspire to do much more than that. We aspire to people to equip people with the knowledge and the skills, and we could do that much more effectively. So to answer your question, yes, you could do it better. I'm not sure that the program, the course, or whatever would look exactly like it does today. You'd want to split it out into those two parts: the experience that you want people to have and the resources you want them to have access to. But it would make much more of a difference to their capability if you were challenging people and not just dumping content on them.
You see, I'm sorry, Ian. One of the things I always said is a 5-day course or 6-day course, including an exam, is not long enough to teach a security safety officer. It's just not. And literally, it's why these people, they turn up, they come and do it is sit there, do your multiple choice exam, and that is it. It's gone. Everything they've learned, they haven't been immersed into the actual skills and the understanding. They haven't been put into those positions. As I always said, you can't be a nurse within 5 days. You can't be a policeman within five days.
Yeah.
You can't be a basic infantry soldier within 5 days. But in our industry, within 5 days or your 6 days, including exam, wow, you've got a license to be a security officer. There is so much to learn, and there's so much to take on board. And, you know, I once said to an organisation, this is just too short. And they went, well, that's what the regulator requires.
Yeah. If I was going to have a stab at that, I would work through the 5DI process. And I think, well, we've got, okay, 5 days. You're not going to get any more time than that. But during those 5 days, I'd want to look at the data about what are the top, 10 or look at the kind of the graph of what are the main issues, what are the main legal problems that people face, what are the situations that are most likely to cause harm to a safety officer, and let's actually bring those front and center in the program and make some space by shifting all of the other content, which is people need to know, but is less likely to impact on them kind of personally or the public personally, move that into some kind of resource that they can access or something that they need to sign that they've looked at, but actually give them more space in that 5 days to actually focus on the main situations they're likely to encounter and the things that are most likely to put themselves or other people at risk.
I'm going to ask, because I am, as I say, really conscious of the time, and you don't get a world famous author every day to talk.
Well, famous.
You're now. Stop ruining it. You're a guest. For God's sake, take the compliment.
Yeah. More
thing. But the bottom line is I've tried to propose to our regulator that what we need to do, if we can't do what you suggested, is to adopt a driving test center model. So because one of the problems is, because in case I didn't tell you, the training providers get to mark all their own work. Yeah. Essentially. Yeah. So that at least the candidates that they've trained went somewhere else to do their practical skills so that they couldn't have it staged, and that they did all their exams there as well. Like you do a theory test, don't you, if you're driving. That we should do that, because then at least then the candidate can spend the time that they need to absorb what they need to know, using resources that could be created and made available, so that when they went there, they could at least have the theoretical side of it, and then a little bit of the practical, on the understanding that then when they went somewhere, they would have to go and work for a firm or with a company where they weren't left alone, because that's the other thing.
I really like that.
Often left isolated.
You were really onto something there, because that splits out, as you say, the kind of the content, the theoretical, and the experience and the practical. How do you know this person could drive a car? Well, because I sat with them in a car and asked them to do a whole bunch of typical things you have to do, and they did them. That's how I know they can drive the car. So I think it's a really nice illustration of how already that model is kind of applied and works well in some important situations. So yeah, I like that.
Oh, that's very nice of you. Right, so as that thing, as I say, we're gonna do the outro now.
We have to do a dance. Was there you didn't tell me how to do a dance?
but yeah, we're going to do all sorts. You know, don't worry about it. Just follow our lead. So,
All
Gary, what have you got to say?
What have I got to say? I'll tell you what I've got to say. First of all, you need a double barrel name. You know.
Oh yeah, God, yeah. I should have said.
You need a double barrel name for a start.
I'll be in Fox Good Looking.
Ian Fox Good Looking.
Ian Handsome Fox. That's actually better. Actually, well done. Good idea. You know. Carry on, Gary.
You guess you could get away with that. Sorry, yes. Ian Handsome Fox. Sounds like a rock star now, don't you? Or a boy band.
Yeah.
Anyway, just to sum up on our point of view, that was really interesting. But what I take away from this is we do need to change the training in our industry. It's very important, and I like your idea of the driving test model. That's a really great idea. You've never said that to me before, so well done, old boy. Brilliant stuff. Go away. There's so much more I actually want to ask Nick, and there's so much more deeper to go into this. But yeah, to sum it up, content dumping doesn't really work. We do need to look at our changing methods and training methods, and it needs to be done. And obviously, as I say to most of our guests, Nick, sorry, you're very, very interesting. I've learned a lot from you today, and I'd love to have you back so we can go further down this path.
Yeah, I've enjoyed the conversation, so anytime. Yeah, cool.
Well, do you know you're the only person who said that when he's finished? Most people say, don't say that. So you made this day already.
Yeah.
So so Nick, all I've got to say literally is thank you so much for being on, etc. Have you got any final words for us?
No, I don't think I have. If anyone's interested in any of this stuff, there's loads of stuff for free. You don't have to buy the book. Out kind of on the internet. You rabbiting on about this stuff, 5GI toolkits. So yeah, just
where would they find that? What is your website?
I think I'm a bit of I'm a LinkedIn loudmouth. I'm even on TikTok, although I don't do much of this stuff on TikTok. I've got videos, and I've got a website, shackleton-consulting.com. But if you just type in my name, you'll find me on Twitter and things like that as well.
If you typed in my name, find me in jail. That's probably. but other than that, I've just got to say thank you very much for coming on board. Absolutely loved it. Yeah, and again, so much I want to talk to you about other things, other issues and bits and pieces. I'm going to call it on that now. I'm going to say goodbye and I'm going to stop recording because otherwise I'll just continue. All right, now just a moment. Let's see. We just all need to sort of say goodbye.
Let's do the outro face.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Do the outro face.
Yeah, that's right. So see you later, everyone. Bye.